You know, Thomas, people often ask me about our different approaches to invention. They want to know about AC versus DC, but what really intrigued me was how differently we work day to day. I would spend days, sometimes weeks, just thinking about a problem before I ever touched a piece of equipment. Take my rotating magnetic field discovery. I was walking through Veresliget Park in Budapest, reciting Goethe's Faust, when suddenly I could see it. The entire AC motor system, complete and perfect, rotating in my mind. I drew it in the sand with a stick, and that drawing became the foundation for every AC motor built since.
That's remarkable, but it's so different from how my mind works. I need to build it, test it, break it, rebuild it. When I was developing the phonograph, I went through hundreds of different materials for the diaphragm: paper, metal, glass, even human skin from cadavers. Each attempt taught me something new about sound reproduction. My boys at the laboratory used to joke that I never met a material I wouldn't try to turn into an invention. I kept notebooks on everything, not just successes, but every single failure with detailed notes about why it didn't work.
Your persistence was legendary. But I always wondered, didn't you sometimes feel like you were working in the dark? I mean, if you had understood the underlying electromagnetic principles mathematically, couldn't you have skipped thousands of those experiments? When I designed the AC system, I could calculate exactly how much current would be lost over distance, what voltage transformations would be needed. It was all predictable.
But here's what you're missing, Nikola. Those thousands of experiments weren't just about finding what worked. They were about finding what could be manufactured reliably, what could be sold to ordinary people, what could make money to fund the next round of research. Take the light bulb filament. Sure, I could have calculated the resistance needed, but I also had to find something that could be mass-produced cheaply, that wouldn't burn out too quickly, that customers would accept. That required testing everything from bamboo fibers to horsehair.
I'll grant you that. My perfectionism was probably my greatest weakness as a businessman. I would spend months refining a design to eliminate the tiniest inefficiency, even when the original version would have worked perfectly well commercially. I remember reworking my entire wireless transmission system because I noticed a microscopic power loss that no practical application would ever detect. Meanwhile, you were already manufacturing and selling products that were good enough and using the profits to develop better versions.
Exactly. And that's not to say I didn't care about perfection, but I learned early that perfect can be the enemy of profitable. When I was working on the stock ticker, I could have spent years making it absolutely flawless, but Western Union needed it immediately. The version I delivered worked well enough to revolutionize financial communication, and the $40,000 they paid me funded months of research on the telephone. Your approach produced more elegant solutions, but my approach paid for more laboratories. Now, Nikola, we should probably address the elephant in the room, that $50,000 incident. People have been gossiping about it for decades, and most of them get the story completely wrong. You came to me with improvements to our DC dynamos, and I said if you could deliver what you promised, it would be worth $50,000 to the company. When you actually did it, and I'll admit, your improvements were remarkable, you came asking for the money.
And you told me, Tesla, you don't understand our American humor. I had worked for months, barely sleeping, redesigning 24 different types of dynamos. The performance improvements were extraordinary: 15% more efficient, significantly reduced maintenance requirements. I genuinely believed you intended to honor that commitment. But perhaps I was naive about American business practices.
Look, I'll be honest with you, that wasn't my finest hour. The problem wasn't your work, which was exceptional. The problem was that $50,000 represented nearly half our annual research budget. I had 12 other projects running, payroll for 30 employees, and investors breathing down my neck. I should have been clearer about whether that was a serious offer or just encouragement. But losing you was one of the biggest mistakes I made during those years.
I appreciate that admission. But you know, Thomas, that experience taught me something valuable about the difference between our approaches to money. For you, money was a tool. You used it to build bigger laboratories, hire more assistants, fund more research. You understood that wealth could multiply invention. I, on the other hand, treated money as almost contaminating. After I left your company, When Westinghouse offered me those generous royalty terms for my AC patents, I should have kept them.
That decision still baffles me. When you tore up that contract, what was it, $1.50 per horsepower? You literally walked away from what could have been hundreds of millions of dollars. I heard Westinghouse was struggling financially, but they would have recovered, and you would have been the richest inventor in history.
George was in trouble, and those royalty payments were hampering his ability to compete with you and General Electric. I believed that AC power was going to transform human civilization, and it has. I wanted that transformation to happen as quickly as possible, not to be slowed down by my personal financial interests. Besides, I was making good money from my patents and consulting work. I thought that would continue indefinitely.
But it didn't continue, did it? I watched you move from laboratory to laboratory, always one project away from the big breakthrough that would solve your financial problems. Meanwhile, I was building a system, research facilities, manufacturing plants, distribution networks. When one invention succeeded, it funded 10 more attempts. When I sold my company to General Electric, I kept enough stock to ensure I'd never have to worry about funding research again.
You're absolutely right. There were nights in my later years at the Waldorf Astoria when I wondered what my life would have been like if I had kept those Westinghouse royalties. I was charging my meals to my room, making increasingly desperate promises to investors about wireless power transmission. Meanwhile, you had multiple revenue streams, a secure financial foundation. I chose idealism over pragmatism, and I paid the price.
But here's the thing, Nikola, I'm not sure your choice was wrong, just expensive. Your AC system did transform civilization. Every time I flip a light switch, I'm using your technology. My DC system would have worked for individual buildings, but it never could have powered entire cities across vast distances. You sacrificed your personal wealth for a genuinely superior technology that serves humanity better. I built an empire, but you changed the world.
That's generous of you to say. Though I wonder sometimes what I could have accomplished with the resources you commanded. You had teams of skilled machinists, access to the finest materials, relationships with manufacturers and investors. I worked alone, mostly, building prototypes by hand in rented spaces. Perhaps if I had been better at the business side, I could have changed the world faster and more completely. Thomas, one thing I've always been curious about: how did you manage to maintain such close relationships with your assistants and colleagues? I heard wonderful stories about the camaraderie at Menlo Park, the late-night celebrations when someone achieved a breakthrough. I must confess, I was never able to create that kind of atmosphere. My perfectionism and peculiarities tended to isolate me from others.
Well, it wasn't always as harmonious as the newspapers made it sound. I was a demanding boss, no question about that. I expected the same 18-hour days from my assistants that I put in myself. But I also made sure they shared in the successes. When we got the phonograph working, I sent the whole team to Delmonico's for the finest dinner in New York. When we solved the incandescent bulb, everyone got bonuses. People will work incredibly hard if they feel genuinely appreciated and included in the victory.
I admired that about your operation, but I could never quite replicate it. I had this compulsion, still do, actually, where I had to count my steps, calculate the cubic volume of my food, arrange my napkins in perfect squares. Most people found it off-putting. And I was so focused on the technical perfection of my work that I forgot to acknowledge the human beings helping me achieve it. I probably went through more assistants in a year than you did in a decade.
Those weren't character flaws, Nikola. They were just differences in how our minds worked. But I'll tell you what I think held you back socially. You never learned to translate your vision into language that ordinary people could understand. When I demonstrated the phonograph, I'd have it play "Mary Had a Little Lamb," so everyone could immediately grasp what it did. When you talked about wireless power transmission, you'd start explaining electromagnetic field theory. People's eyes would glaze over.
I remember giving presentations to potential investors where I would spend 40 minutes explaining the mathematics of resonant frequency transmission, and I could see them losing interest with every equation. You, on the other hand, would light up a room full of bulbs and say, "Gentlemen, this is the future of illumination. Immediate, concrete, profitable." I was trying to explain miracles when I should have been demonstrating magic tricks.
But here's what's interesting. Despite your social difficulties, despite your financial struggles, you achieved something I never did. You became a genuine scientific celebrity, almost a mythical figure. People called me the Wizard of Menlo Park, but they meant it as a compliment to my practical achievements. When they talked about you, there was this sense of mystery, of genius that transcended ordinary understanding. You captured the public imagination in a way I never could.
That celebrity was both a blessing and a curse. Yes, it brought attention to my work, but it also attracted every crackpot inventor and fortune seeker in America. I spent countless hours listening to people pitch impossible perpetual motion machines or explaining why their nephew's electrical theory was going to revolutionize physics. And the newspapers, they loved to portray me as this eccentric hermit communicating with Mars, when I was doing serious research on radio communication.
The press treatment was frustrating for both of us, wasn't it? They wanted simple stories, the practical American inventor versus the mysterious European genius. They never understood that we were both trying to solve the same fundamental problem. How do you take a scientific principle and turn it into something that improves ordinary people's lives? We just approached it from opposite directions.
Exactly. And looking back now, I think we both succeeded, just in different ways. You created an industrial research model that continues to this day: systematic experimentation, commercial focus, team collaboration. Every major corporation's R&D department follows principles you established at Menlo Park. I contributed some fundamental technologies, but you created the entire framework for how technological innovation happens in the modern world.
And your contributions were more fundamental than you give yourself credit for. Every electric motor, every power grid, every radio transmission builds on principles you discovered. But more than that, you proved that pure scientific research driven by curiosity rather than immediate commercial application, could produce world-changing breakthroughs. You showed that the impractical dreamer could be just as valuable as the practical businessman.
Perhaps our greatest achievement was demonstrating that there's no single path to innovation. The world needs both approaches: systematic experimentation and intuitive leaps, commercial pragmatism and scientific idealism, team collaboration and solitary genius. If every inventor followed your model, we'd have incremental improvements but miss revolutionary breakthroughs. If everyone followed mine, we'd have beautiful theories but no practical applications.
Now that's something I can absolutely agree with. The future belongs to people who can combine our approaches: dreamers who understand business, businessmen who appreciate pure science, team players who can also think independently. Neither of us was perfect, but together, our different methods advanced human knowledge faster than either of us could have alone.